Hello, and thank you for joining us today on Workforce Institute Radio. I'm Joyce Maloney, Director of the Workforce Institute at Kronos Incorporated, and today I'm speaking with two of our distinguished board members, Charlene Lobby, the HR bartender, and William Tincup. Charlene is president of the ITM Group, a training company focused on developing programs to retain and engage talent in the workplace, and as a blogger, she is well known as the HR bartender. William is one of the country's leading thinkers on social media for HR and an expert on driving adoption of HR technology inside of organizations. He's been blogging about HR-related issues since 2007 and is a contributor to Fistful of Talent, Talent Culture, an HR Examiner, and co-host of a daily HR podcast called Drive Through HR. Charlene and William, thank you so much for being here today.
Thanks for having us.
Glad to be here.
Great. So the topic for discussion today is mobile workforce management. At Kronos, we've really been focused for the past several years on designing and delivering mobile solutions for our customers. The demand is there, the demand is growing, and frankly, it just makes a lot of sense. Our customers want that ability to manage in the moment that running our applications on a smartphone or a tablet can provide. You both engage with lots of HR practitioners, and I'd like to ask you a few questions today about trends in the mobile space you both are seeing. So let me pose the first question, and we'll start with William on this one. William, what do you see as barriers to adoption at this point? One concern we've noted among employers is how to manage the issue of time on and off the clock vis-a-vis overtime if employees are always available via mobile devices. So what's your take on this as a concern, and are there other issues that you see related to the use of mobile technology?
Yeah, for me, I think the world separates at hourly versus professional or exempt versus non-exempt in some ways. If you have an hourly worker and they're doing work outside of the workplace but on their device, I have concerns about that. If you're making their life better, like shift swapping and things like that, well, that's not necessarily work. You're adding to the value of their life. You're making their life easier, and they're using their mobile device as they would have used the old-fashioned phone or walking into the place. So I think that if you can separate those worlds, I think we back up to what are some of the natural barriers. Well, everyone has to have a device. So we'll start with the basics, which I think we're going to get to a point in all of our lives here in the not too distant future where there are no more dumb phones. Everyone's got a smartphone. Everyone's got at least one of these types of devices. So we will get to a point pretty soon where everyone does have a device. And then I think, for me, it's the natural progression of what do we want you to do with the device? What is the appropriate use and inappropriate use of this device? Meaning the layer of training. We want you to be able to do this with your device. You want to switch shifts. You want to check email or share content or add to our knowledge library. We want you to read the menu before your shift starts. So that's quote unquote training. So we have to train the audience, I think, and in both, whether or not you look at the world as exempt or non-exempt or as one whole totality, I think training is probably the number one thing that we have to do as HR pros and vendors that serve HR pros, is we have to train people on how to use those devices, what is and isn't appropriate. And I think that in doing so, the last thing I'd probably say is the layer of communication. What can we do that communicates as we learn new uses, the unintended, intended uses of these phones and technology, and that we're constantly in communication with our workforce about what we're learning. I think that changes the role of most HR pros. It's not one and done. It's not once a year. It could be, in minutes and seconds as opposed to months and days and weeks. So our communication pattern and rhythms have changed because of this. But the upside is we are going to be a little bit more connected and I think a smarter workforce, if you will.
And Charlene, what's your take?
I agree with William regarding the point of view of hourly employees versus salaried employees. And I think that companies that are looking to adopt a mobile strategy are going to have to sit down and clearly define what they're trying to do with a mobile device, both in terms of if there's a level of expectation that hourly staff are going to be connected to a mobile device outside of their normal working hours, and what does that mean and what does it look like? And that's something that they might have to get their, friendly neighborhood employment attorney involved in that conversation, because I think that over the course of time we're going to see more and more guidance on how to deal with those kinds of issues. When we talk about salaried staff, the first thing that popped into my mind was it brought me back to my hotel days, and I thought about working at these very large properties and walking around as a manager and people asking me questions all the time. And I used to actually walk around with a pad of paper around the hotel, and so when people asked me questions, I could write them all down, so when I got back to my physical office, I could answer them all. And what I see now is I have the ability to take, whether it's my phone or my tablet, with me, and when someone asks me a question, I can answer it right away. I think it's a tremendous productivity tool, because now I'm not just having a conversation and then going back and reliving it in my office. I can take care of business while I'm walking around. And I think that that's a huge benefit for organizations. But as William pointed out, when we do that and we give people the tools to create, manage themselves easier, faster, more efficiently, we're going to have to train them as well. It's not as simple as let me hand you a tablet and just go off and do whatever it is you want to do.
It's interesting you bring up the tablet, because we've had smartphone technology at Kronos as a mobile strategy for a couple of years longer than we've had tablets reasonably new for us in the last year. But our product folks have felt from the get-go that tablets would be more disruptive and even perhaps more readily adopted by customers than smartphones. And I wonder, Charlene, what's your take on that?
I think that people are moving in that direction, but I use myself as the example. I have a tablet, but I still have the laptop, and I still have the desktop. So the question is, at the point in time, is there a point in time where I'll say, well, I don't need that desktop anymore, or I don't need that laptop anymore, because my tablet is doing all of those functions for me. So I think that there has to be some balance along the way about what the capabilities are of the laptop, and can the laptop replace another piece of equipment.
Yeah.
I'm not sure it can replace my phone, because my phone performs this calling function, but for the other things, can I really, replace it? I'm hoping that tablets replace laptops, because I'd love to not carry my laptop and my tablet. But
no, me too. I would say in the last year that I've been traveling, more often than not, I don't take the laptop. But I would have to say there's certain things still, if it's a spreadsheet exercise or creating PowerPoint presentations, even though I know you can do those things on the tablet, personally I'm still more comfortable on the laptop doing those types of tasks. What about you, William? Where do you come down on tablet versus smartphone in the workplace?
For me, I think we probably need to get used to or accustomed to the mouse and clicker thingy-mabob versus touch. And for me, I think I watched the Corning video that was put out about a year ago, where they basically talked about the future of glass and how all of our applications will be run all over our house. So every area that has a surface that has glass, you'll be able to run applications off of that glass by touching. And if you haven't watched this on YouTube, it's futuristic, and of course it makes it look like it's going to come next year, but this is probably 30 years away. But Google's creating a watch that's going to be on your wrist, and you'll be able to touch it and access applications. That touching, using your fingers to touch, explore, create, etc., I think that touch future is all of our futures, whether or not it's in a tablet, whether or not it's on a phone, whether or not it's on a window or your dash of your car. I think that touch computing is the future. And right now, we still separate between what happens on a desktop and quote-unquote power computing, things that happen that are really complex. Once they make those applications available for touch, we won't need desktops anymore. So laptops and desktops, we won't need any of that quote-unquote functionality that happens on those places. We'll be able to touch. And so how does that affect the workforce? I think that there's going to be all kinds of surface-related technology that's going to pop up all around the workplace. So in conference rooms or in restaurants or at tables. So I think that I would lock in just to the tablet. I think the tablet is an iterative step. That it's great, but people are going to be carrying around all kinds of different forms where there's technology embedded in those forms, and they can touch to create whatever is needed to be created. So I think that for me, it's not the point and click. Like right now we're tethered to the mouse in a lot of ways. That when the mouse can be just a little thing in our laptop or the touch screen or whatever, but the ability to touch, I mean, how often does it happen in all of our lives where you want to like touch a monitor? Like how many times does that happen? Like I was walking through DFW the other day, and I walked by this big giant sign, and it was a map to locations and you're finding a restaurant or whatever. And I went up to it and I started touching. I just assumed that I could touch it and find stuff. And of course, it didn't like that. The sign just kind of stared at me blankly. And I think that we have these monitors in front of us, and how often do we want to touch these monitors and make things happen? The way that our kids are growing up, I mean, my 3-year-old and my 7-year-old know more about my iPad than I do, because they're already accustomed to using their fingers rather than using a surrogate in the form of a mouse and a cord and a clicker to get to the place. They're using their fingers. And so I think that's the future of computing. And I think how does that affect our workforces? They're going to be using their hands to manipulate all these things. And so I think the tablet is a great iterative step for that. But I don't think that's the end game.
Yeah. No, I agree with you. I think back to when I started in the computing business, if you will, the state of the art was DOS. And then, when Windows came out, it was this revelation, that you didn't have to essentially program everything that you wanted to do. So I agree with you that we're just on an evolutionary path to something that's ultimately going to be even more different than what we see today with the tablets. So as we move into the tools that we have to work with today, tablets, smartphones, et cetera, and I'm going to start with you, Charlene. What issues do you think that employers need to consider before they adopt a mobile solution?
Employers should develop a mobile strategy, just like they have a social strategy or any other kind of strategy in the organization. It doesn't need to be this monster document, but they should really sit down and say, why are we doing this? Why are we creating or allowing, mobile to infiltrate the workplace? Because you need to know why it would be working. You need to know the sign of success. And that's going to include lots of different things in terms of, just from a technical standpoint, who owns the equipment, who maintains the equipment, what do you do if the equipment is lost or stolen or broken, how will all of those things get handled? Companies have to address the security issue. security, not just the security of the equipment itself, but security of data, how people will access it, where people can access it, what to do if, whether accidentally there's a breach or a hack of a program that's being used. So these are all contingencies that I think need to be thought out in advance. It will put minds at ease as a mobile strategy is being implemented within the organization. It also gives people the opportunity to play out the what-ifs. And, the devil's advocates who could potentially say, we're not ready for this, it gives them the opportunity to sort of play those scenarios out in their mind. I think the last thing employers need to consider is, we've talked about it a couple of times already, is the idea of training. Just because we all have the equipment doesn't mean we're all equally proficient at it. It's interesting, one of the things that I'm noticing a lot is mobile photography classes. So it just reminds me that while we all have maybe a phone that has a camera function on it, it doesn't mean that we are all equally proficient in using the camera function on our phone, to the point where there's classes to teach us how to use it. And somebody else might say, there's a button, you hit the button, you take a photo. But for other people, they're looking for something different. And I think that the training component is going to be essential in making sure that everyone is comfortable using mobile technology.
I think those are good points. And what about you, William? What do you think?
Well, I think the thing for most companies as they look at this is this a nice to have or is this a need to have? And I think we're quickly going to kind of move to yes, it is a need to have. Okay, great. But I think you start at the analysis, okay, everyone's rushing into mobile. It's like, well, before we rush, let's just make sure that we really need to have this. And in the perfect scenario, what you do is you align your mobile strategy makes your business better. Okay, and at the end of that, it makes people's lives better. It makes your employees' lives better. So when can you align making the business better and the lives of your employees better, all as a conduit through your values? What are the values of the company? So I think it's that alignment, because we can make the business better, and you can define a mobile strategy that makes the business better, but doesn't necessarily make the employees' lives better. Or you can make someone's lives better and yet not really be facilitating business growth or making the business better. So it's really the alignment of those things. And to reiterate some of the things that my colleague has already said, start with the objective. What is the objective of our mobile strategy? What are we really trying to do? And I would look at that and then bring that three-prong of, okay, how does it make it the business better? How is it in alignment with our values? And how does it make our employees' lives better? And why are we doing that is tangential to that as well. Communicate all of this. Like mobile strategy, just like any other strategy, works best out in the open air. Communicate with folks as to why we're doing this. We're giving you this device. Here is the explicit social contract that we're now having with you about this. We want you to do this. We believe it'll help us with business growth. Like, you can speak in very simple terms, in very clear terms of just like, we're trying to make our business better. We want to make your life better. Instead of having to go into the office and check your schedule, that wastes gas and wastes a lot of time. Well, now you just, pop online and check your schedule. If you want to swap out something, swap it out. Like, we're making your life better, but we're also making our business better. And then obviously layering in, I think the best training regimen is when people think of training and they quote and they see the word relentless. So oftentimes when we think of the old school thought of training is like, okay, I got trained. Well, got trained is the wrong way of thinking about it. It is a relentless pursuit of knowledge. And I think if we think like that, then we're going to be able to train people where they are, at the pace that they are, with the knowledge that they need at the time in which they need it, which is a relentless pursuit of training. And so I think it changes, our definition of training and the way that we approach training, because I think that it's moving so fast. That's what they need. That's what our audience needs. And so the last thing I think that mobile can give us, if we unlock its potential, is meeting the audience where they are. Meeting the audience where they are. You're on your device already. We're meeting you there, and we're giving you applications and technology that makes your life better. And I don't think it's. I think it's okay to talk about we're making your life better and we're making our business better together.
I think that the clear communications and expectation settings, as you've mentioned, also links back to something Charlene said a little earlier about the labor law around the use of mobile phones is frankly, or mobile devices in general, is still in its infancy, and there have been legal cases already around people feeling like they were on the clock by virtue of being on their mobile device outside of their normal working hours. So I think that notion of balancing the needs of the business and the rights of the employees and the preferences of the employees is really critical, and of course beginning with being super clear about what constitutes being on the clock and what doesn't. And I'm sure these issues will be, they're going to be making their way through the courts for some time to come, but it seems to me just like any other change being introduced into a business, exactly what you've said about having that two-way conversation, making it clear why we're introducing these devices into the workplace and how we feel it benefits the employees as well as the organization is key to avoiding any unanticipated downsides of taking advantage of the convenience of these devices.
Joyce, if I may, I
Sure.
think that for me it's the polar ends of have to versus want to. If I have to be on my device, that as an employee, then I should probably be compensated in some way for that. If that's salary, then that's a part of kind of the gig. If it's hourly, then we should probably figure out a mechanism for that, etc. If it's have to. So for me, and I'm separating the worlds of have to versus want to, if I want to be on the device because I'm inside of a knowledge community and I'm learning about best practices and I'm learning about, different ways and different things that we're doing, et cetera, well, that's a choice. I don't have to do it. I want to. I aspire to learn, and I want to do it. I think the real hard separation is when we have a virtual gun to people's heads and they have to be on their device. And so I might, I don't know how it'll legally get sorted out, but for me, that's how I separate those two worlds.
Yeah, I agree.
I think that some of the challenges along the way are going to be when you deal with or when you have expectations for, let's say, for example, on-call staff who, I think about, some of the positions that I've been in the past where you maybe have a on-call or a contingency workforce that you'd like to reach out to if there's work available. Where does that fit in to the expectation that someone will be connected? I mean, obviously, as William pointed out, they probably want to because they want the work, but what's the level of expectation where those kinds of things are concerned? And it brings up a fascinating dynamic with regard to training. I might want to learn something, but is there also a level of expectation from the organization that I will learn it? And that becomes then part of my responsibilities, and how does that play out if I'm not within the scheduled time that I'm working? So it's a fascinating dynamic, and it'll be interesting to see how that plays out over time in the workplace community in terms of people raising issues and challenging it, and really putting the question out there for the courts to weigh in on.
So Charlene, we heard from William that the future of mobile is, every surface that we touch could potentially be, a computing interface. What are your predictions for the future of mobile?
The thing I wonder the most about mobile is because there's this great interest in it, and for good reason. I think there's a lot of opportunity for mobile. The question for me is, as we start to learn more about mobile and we touch it and we do things with it, will user expectation exceed the technology itself? I mean, right now, whenever we say to ourselves, I wonder if my app can, is there an app that can do this? We kind of joke around and say, oh, yeah, there's an app for that. Will there ever come a point in time where there's not an app for that, where our expectations exceed the innovation coming out of the technology community? And that's the part that I'm interested in watching and learning about as we all become more adjusted to mobile technology and what it can bring to us in both our personal and our professional lives.
I think that's a good segue to the last question I wanted to ask both of you is mobile is a tightly related topic to the controversy that arose last week around Marissa Mayer's decision to order the Yahoo telecommuters back to the office. And I'll start with you, Charlene. Obviously mobile technology is the infrastructure that makes telecommunications or telecommuting rather possible, and frankly increasingly possible, over the last couple of decades. So I'm wondering what's your take on that decision that Marissa Mayer made, because clearly she believes that the physical interconnectedness has value above and beyond what's possible with telecommuting.
Every organization has to evaluate why they're in it. And, for example, when it comes to telecommuting, that's another decision where the company has to say to itself, this is why we're doing it, and this is the benefit that we hope to achieve by allowing telecommuting. And at the point that, if you look at it from the standpoint that the company says this is the benefit we want to achieve from telecommuting, and maybe employees have a benefit that they want to achieve by telecommuting. So both parties are saying to themselves, this is what I'm hoping to accomplish. At the point in time that one or both of those entities isn't getting the result that they're looking for, you have to go back and reevaluate it. There could very well become a point in time where Yahoo decides to change their mind and, roll out a telecommuting policy again. So the question becomes, is it working now? And if it's not working now, how do they go about fixing it? And then is there an opportunity in the future where they might roll that out again? So my take on this is we might not know all of the reasons that the decision was made, but the question becomes, how are they going to handle it in the future?
Now, I don't recall if you've run a poll in the last week or so. Do you have a feeling from your pretty large following how the sentiment is running pro and con about that decision?
I'm seeing a real 50-50 split in the people commentary that I see. On one hand, there are a lot of people who have seen the benefits of telework and are concerned that there's a benefit being lost. I mean, on one hand, we know if you look at the Fortune 100, I think 85 of the Fortune 100 offer some sort of telework or flexible work benefit. So there's definitely a benefit there, a realized benefit that is no longer an option if the policy is peeled back in its entirety. On the other hand, you are seeing people who are saying, I understand why they're doing it, because there's a unique set of challenges happening within that particular organization right now that need to be addressed. Which is why, when we start to talk about rolling out a mobile strategy, we mentioned it a couple of questions ago, you have to decide why you're doing it. That will guide your decision-making going forward. It could be that you decide to do it because it's, as William mentioned, it's good for the business. You might decide that you're doing it because it's good for employees, and what's good for employees is good for the business. But you have to go back and monitor that every once in a while and sort of say to yourself, do that pulse point, that checkpoint, and say, is it really working the way that it's supposed to be working? And make adjustments along the way as necessary.
And what about you, William? What do you think?
Well, if we look at it from just Yahoo, and not Yahoo as the beginning of a slippery slope that would lead to something much greater, the cynical side of me thinks it's brilliant. It's absolutely a stroke of genius and probably the best decision ever because we're talking about Yahoo. And they're in a hyper-competitive environment, Silicon Valley. They're competing with all of the social media companies that are out there, plus the traditional technology giants that are out there. And it's kind of hard to recruit people to Yahoo because most people have written off Yahoo because of all the failed bits over the last decade. And the fact that we're talking about Yahoo today proves that the PR strategy was brilliant. And I believe that all of this was well thought out, that this was not just I came in on a Tuesday and I deleted telework on Wednesday. All of this was well thought out from the perspective of we need to talk about Yahoo. We need to get people to think about Yahoo again. And she has to she has to get control, quote unquote control, of what is Yahoo. And so, it's the pendulum that goes way over to the left and then it comes back. And I think that, the Yahoo telework strategy in 2 years from now will be a much more refined, but it'll be unknown. And so I think that it will come back. Now, that's Yahoo. Yahoo has to do what's in Yahoo's best interest. And as the CEO of I believe, I'm just going to say failing, although people will point to the earnings and not say they're failing, but the fact that they're not a part of a global, an ecosystem or conversation where we mention their name in the first, 40 technology companies in Silicon Valley, that's a fail. So for me, they're a failing publicly traded company. She's got to do whatever she's got to do to make that right. And so she's got to peel away a bunch of the ineffectiveness and inefficiency and failed acquisitions. And I think this is just one step amongst the next 100 that she'll make of making Yahoo more nimble and more like a startup and peeling away all of the inefficiency. And while we might not like the fact that she views telework as an inefficiency for her and Yahoo, it has clearly become an inefficiency. Now, that's just Yahoo's case. So if we can just kind of separate, she's doing what's in the best interest of Yahoo as an aside, I think what terrifies everyone in HR, is that this leads to other places seeing that and saying, well, we're going to do the same thing. And, we've already seen that with Best Buy announcing this week that they're revising their telework strategy. So I think it touches on something that, we've been assuming that telework is good, it's efficient, you're meeting your audience where they need to be, they're more engaged because they get to work in the way that they want. It's also, better for families, better for working moms and dads, that they can work in a different way. And so this is a good thing. And I think we've all thought of it as telework equals good. and to have someone challenge that at its base and say, well, actually, telework equals bad. I think it's terrifying, and it's terrifying for all of us because we don't want to wake up into a world where we, go back to the 1940s where, you have to check in at the place, everybody, and we view work as this one-dimensional, only one size fits all, and so I think that terrifies everyone. So if I can kind of separate the two issues, for me, I think it was a stroke of genius from a PR perspective, the fact that we're actually talking about Yahoo. I think that it will come back and they'll have a revised strategy and plan over time, because had she done half measures, I mean, imagine a story a couple weeks ago if she would have come out and announced, hey, we're kind of looking at telework and we're thinking about revising some of the things for some people. Well, no one would have cared. That would have been like every other corporate memo, in the United States that no one cares about. No one would have cared. She had to do something extremely blunt, and getting rid of telework is, if nothing else, is blunt. And so I think by doing so, it was calculated because the board wants people to talk about Yahoo. But I think the greater conversation about how it will affect every company. I think if companies need to do what's in their best interest for their company growth and their company health, as well as the lives of the employees, and so I think that hopefully it doesn't become a slippery slope discussion, and hopefully other companies don't really see that as the new future.
I have to say, William, I hadn't thought about the deliberate public relations aspect of this decision, and I think that's a very, I think it's an intriguing read on what's happened here. I haven't heard anybody else say that, but I think that's a highly plausible explanation for what happened here. And I agree with you. If you're trying to fire that, startup feeling, and we're all, back on the same, boat rowing in the same direction, that there is some value to what she's doing, at least as a temporary strategy. But we'll leave the audience to think about the extent to which they believe that this was as much PR as a deliberate business strategy, or a strategy to turn around the commitment of the employees. So, Charlene, any parting thoughts before I bid you guys adieu?
No, I guess that sort of go forth and take your mobile devices with you. I think that it's going to be around for a long time, and I don't think that the conversation is over. So it'll be interesting to revisit it, in 6 months or a year and see how much has changed. Great.
Well, thank you very much. Thank you to Charlene and William. It's been a very interesting discussion today about mobile and about Yahoo. And I hope our listeners enjoyed it as much as I did. So for those of you who are listening, thanks for joining us, and please visit us on the web at workforceinstitute.org.